The whole idea behind the Department of Justice, right, is supposed to be enforcing the law without fear of favor, correct? And that's what the American people want. That's what Vermonters want. I hear that from them all the time. And that's what our Constitution actually demands. So when a U.S. attorney stands before a judge and say that they are there not to represent the people, but to represent a president, understandably, there are alarm bells that start ringing. So we're 2 months into this administration. So far, we've had a U.S. attorney publicly state that his office is composed of President Trump's lawyers, not lawyers for the people, not lawyers supporting the Constitution, but President Trump's lawyers. They're trying to stake out who is a real American, and it will leave a whole lot of people out. And this, I think, is a frightening road to go down. The arguments we've heard have been with us since our founding. As you pointed out, Professor Frost, the Dred Scott decision changed the common law understanding of birthright citizenship for all. It enabled slave owners to use the law to take away citizenship, to take away identity, to take away the freedom of Black people. The 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 were a direct response to Dred Scott. Last week, Trump's guy in charge of the agency that's supposed to ensure fair access to the media and internet, the FCC, his name's Brendan Carr, he opened an investigation of a radio station that reported on an ICE raid. Mr. Aaron, is the government chilling or limiting speech when it threatens to investigate journalists for literally reporting the news? The Republican budget resolution is a deep betrayal of working people in all of our districts.
Today, we will deliver on the people's mandate by advancing the FY25 budget resolution to restore the fiscal health of our great nation by reining in reckless spending and reigniting economic growth. In addition, we will provide critical resources to our Commander-in-Chief to secure our border, strengthen our military, and provide for the common defense. This budget resolution provides the fiscal framework for what will be one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in modern history, and the principal legislative vehicle for delivering on President Trump's America First agenda. The era of wasteful, woke, and weaponized government is over.
My colleagues have proposed a budget roadmap that gives massive tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and corporations. And how will they pay for the rich getting richer? By making deep cuts to Medicaid and food assistance programs. They are kicking the poor and the middle class to give the ultra-wealthy another unneeded break. So who are those people that are going to be affected? Here are the people I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a woman in South Royalton, Vermont, who called my office. And she told me that she prepaid for all of her home heating oil, but now she's being charged an additional 10% on top of that because the company fears the trade war that's going to be coming with Canada. I'm thinking about the families on Head Start that are calling my office saying they don't know if they're going to have an education program for their kids because Trump froze the federal funding. It creates hardship and anxiety for people who are just trying to make ends meet. What has happened these 4 weeks is a clear indication of who Trump cares about and who he is not thinking about. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Boyle. Here's the deal. So we're 4 weeks in to the Trump administration, and Republicans in Congress are betraying not just the middle class, but working people across this country. Republicans have the House, they have the Senate, they have the White House, and they could be passing legislation to make your life more affordable. They could be working to bring down the costs on groceries, prescription drugs, housing, but instead, Trump is shutting down vital programs that protect and support Americans across this country, and Republicans are letting him do it. Just this week, the Trump administration shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the agency that's responsible for protecting us from waste, fraud, and abuse. The CFPB is one of the few places in government actually charged with standing up to the big banks and the corporations who've ripped off consumers. It has sent $21 billion back to those victims of corporate crimes. Every single state has benefited from the work of the CFPB. Shutting it down, I believe, reveals a deep, deep contempt and cynicism. This president should be laser focused on bringing down costs for Americans and making sure everyone can live a life of security and dignity. But instead, what we are seeing is this administration is taking a wrecking ball to the programs that provide Americans with relief and just some economic security. And again, Republicans are letting him do it. What has happened these 4 weeks is a clear indication of who Trump cares about and who he is not thinking about. But I'm thinking about all the small businesses that have called my office to say that they would be absolutely crushed by a trade war with Canada. They need predictability. They need stability. Everyone who runs a small business knows that because it's such a tight margin. Trump's recklessness and the Republicans' silence about it is a kick in the teeth to working people and small business owners in all of our districts. And look, it's clear from the chaos and the confusion that Republicans are really trying to bury the details. We know what they're trying to do here. They have to cut trillions of dollars of programs in their scheme that people rely on to get the rich their tax cuts that they're demanding. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's talk about the real censorship that's happening right now. We don't need some complicated, hypothetical, deep state plot because we are 3.5 weeks into the Trump administration, and it is actively suppressing free speech, and it's textbook authoritarianism. This whole conversation has become so twisted and so confused, so I want to bring us back to some basics. Mr. Aaron, is it accurate to describe censorship as the suppression of certain words that are considered politically unacceptable?
I think if the government is doing that, that smacks of censorship.
Yes. Is it true that the government may intentionally try to chill speech by threatening legal action or other consequences to intimidate a speaker into silence?
That's certainly true.
So censorship can take several forms. It can be the government banning speech. It can be the government creating an environment of fear that suppresses speech. And I want to look at some of the examples that we are seeing right now with Trump attacking free speech. Last week, Trump's guy in charge of the agency that's supposed to ensure fair access to the media and internet, the FCC, his name's Brendan Carr, he opened an investigation of a radio station that reported on an ICE raid. Mr. Aaron, is the government chilling or limiting speech when it threatens to investigate journalists for literally reporting the news?
I think it's a huge problem. The First Amendment protects the rights of reporters to cover what the government is doing. That's what the radio station in California was doing, is it was reporting on something of very important community interest. So the idea the FCC would respond with an investigation with threats is very incredibly chilling to reporters' ability to do their jobs.
Yeah, it's outrageous. These are the normal operations of any news organization. So let's see what it looks like when the Trump administration intimidates and censors Americans. Let's look at something more direct, more immediate. Trump's anti-DEI orders have resulted in a ban on using certain words in federally funded research. And my colleague, Ms. Jayapal, touched on this earlier. I want to pick up this thread. There's a list circulating at the National Science Foundation banning the use of words like disability, socioeconomic, and even women. I mean, it's completely absurd that they're searching for when the word women is being used in federally funded research. Mr. Aaron, is the government limiting speech when it bans the use of specific words like women?
If the government is saying that you will be ineligible for funding based on your free expression, we have a big problem.
We do have a big problem. And Trump has made it clear that one of his biggest targets for censorship is, in fact, American women. On day one, Trump removed any mention of reproductive health resources from government websites. And this purge included information on privacy protections under HIPAA, the law that keeps our health information private. The Trump administration also completely shut down reproductiverights.gov. At the CDC, officials removed contraceptive guidelines and web pages related to HIV testing. In fact, more than 1,000 government websites have been taken down in the last 2 weeks. And this kind of censorship puts American women at risk. Mr. Aaron, is the government limiting speech when it purges websites of previously public information?
I certainly think it is a terrible practice that endangers public health. The government has its own views and they can make their own websites, but the idea that they would strip away basic public health information that people need to make sure their kids are okay, understand what medicines are, all of the research priorities, that seems far out of bounds.
Shocking. Today we've heard a lot of different legal theories about interpreting the Constitution, and at times I know it feels a little bit like a law school lecture. So I'd like to kind of cut through the legalese and clearly focus on something that I find deeply troubling. What Republicans are offering is a plan to redefine who gets to be American. And it's a big step towards a country where Americanness itself applies to only a privileged few, and a country where future and past generations are relegated to an underclass status. They're trying to stake out who is a real American, and it will leave a whole lot of people out. And this, I think, is a frightening road to go down. The arguments we've heard have been with us since our founding. As you pointed out, Professor Frost, the Dred Scott decision changed the common law understanding of birthright citizenship for all. It enabled slave owners to use the law to take away citizenship, to take away identity, to take away the freedom of Black people. The 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act of 1866 were a direct response to Dred Scott. The law grants citizenship to people born in this country, plain and simple. Yet here we are, over 150 years later, talking about how maybe the straightforward language of the law could possibly or should actually be used to deny citizenship for often people of color. Ms. Frost, did the framers of the 14th Amendment intend to extend birthright citizenship to the children of slaves and other non-citizens?
Yes, the Reconstruction Congress could not have been clearer. They used clear language, and their discussions that followed made this clear. They said, of course, they wanted to overrule Dred Scott, which included giving citizenship to all enslaved Americans, including those who had arrived illegally because they'd been illegally imported after the laws prohibited it. They were the illegal aliens of the day. The Reconstruction Congress said, we want them to have citizenship. The second group explicitly discussed was the children of immigrants, in particular, the children of Chinese immigrants. That was the intention of the Reconstruction Congress, and they achieved that through clear language.
Thank you, through clear language. And citizenship was based on where you were born, correct? And not actually the identity of your parents.
Of course, we are a country that doesn't visit the sins of the father on the child. We believe in the idea that all people born are equally American because they are born in the United States. Our Constitution rejected titles of nobility explicitly. We, of course, rejected a hereditary monarchy. America is about birthplace. It's not about ancestry or lineage.
So is it safe to say that the 14th Amendment enshrined citizenship for an entire class of people and their ancestors?
Yes, of course. And any other rule would require a test of lineage and ancestry for every new child born in the United States. I'd like to quickly add 33 countries have birthright citizenship in response to Congressman Hunt's question, including Mexico and Canada. We are not outliers.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up because I had it in my notes to bring that up as well. So what if the Supreme Court decides that the 14th Amendment actually does not give citizenship to children born in this country to non-citizens? What if the Supreme Court made that ruling? Where does that leave the descendants of those who've been granted birthright citizenship?
Yeah, I mean, it would unwind the citizenship of the entire country. We are a nation of immigrants. A very significant majority of us trace back, really other than Native Americans, trace back our lineage to an immigrant, parent, grandparent. 5% of our military are the children of immigrants. Now, all of us, when we have a baby, the first thing we'd have to do is produce proof of our citizenship. Imagine a generation from now. It wouldn't be good enough to show your own birth certificate. You'd have to show the lineage. This is exactly what the Reconstruction Congress wanted to prevent, And it's exactly the result that Dred Scott wanted.
I appreciate that so much. So let's follow this logic. Say a person's grandparents came to this country from Central Europe in the 19th century. An investigation reveals that those grandparents used false pretenses or false names at Ellis Island. Does that mean, based on what my colleagues would be saying today, that the present-day descendants of those grandparents are not citizens?
The logic of the position is that every single person who considers themselves an American, perhaps people in Congress, certainly people voting, would suddenly be under scrutiny, and any flaw in their family's immigration history, going back to the Contract Labor Act of 1885, where if you came to the US with a contract to work, that was illegal. Many people violated that law in 1885. All of those people, their descendants today, could have their citizenship questioned and could be stripped of their citizenship under the executive order.
Thank you. And if I could, in conclusion, because I see that I'm out of time, doing away with birthright citizenship is an intentional choice to give this president, I believe, massive power to dictate who is and who is not an American. I yield back. I want Vermonters to understand the stakes of what's happening right now at the Department of Justice. And I know many Americans feel in this moment that they can't trust government, and I certainly understand why they might feel that way. Democracies have long struggled with rooting out public corruption, and as long as there is public trust, there are those who will betray the trust for their own power, for their own profit. So how do we combat corruption? How do we ensure the responsible use of power? Those are the things that I think about a lot and that my constituents ask me about. One of the ways that we do that is by entrusting that we have independent, ethical prosecutors to uphold the law, no matter who is in office. And I want to acknowledge and thank everyone for being here today. I especially want to acknowledge Mr. Terwilliger, who previously served the people of Vermont and the nation under the Reagan administration in various roles, including U.S. Attorney. So thank you so much for being here. Mr. Terwilliger, do you agree that one of the most effective ways to fight corruption is to establish and maintain a group of nonpartisan prosecutors who are dedicated to the rule of law?
I certainly agree with that, ma'am, and if you'll allow me just 30 seconds. When I was the U.S. Attorney in Vermont, I had no idea if my assistants were Republicans or Democrats. They were people who believed in the rule of law and applying the rule of law. And if one of them had ever come in and said, we should go after so-and-so because or on account of, I sadly have to tell you, ma'am.
If I could, just because I only give 5 minutes.
Please, let me just finish, 10 seconds. I sadly have to tell you that culture at the Department of Justice changed completely in the last 10, 15 years.
So the whole idea, so to stay with what you're saying, the whole idea behind the Department of Justice, right, is supposed to be enforcing the law without fear of favor, correct? And that's what the American people want. That's what Vermonters want. I hear that from them all the time. And that's what our Constitution actually demands. So when a U.S. attorney stands before a judge and say that they are there not to represent the people, but to represent a president, understandably, there are alarm bells that start ringing. So we're 2 months into this administration. So far, we've had a U.S. attorney publicly state that his office is composed of President Trump's lawyers, not lawyers for the people, not lawyers supporting the Constitution, but President Trump's lawyers. We've seen political purges of nonpartisan career civil servants because they did their jobs, including those who were involved in the January 6 prosecutions. And we've seen a shocking quid pro quo involving the indicted mayor of New York. So you said so yourself. It should not be about partisanship within the office. And I applaud you for that. So thank you for being here. I'd like to turn now to Professor Besky. Professor Besky, under the legislation offered by the majority, specifically Section 1456C, the Attorney General could represent a federal official in any case subject to removal under the statute. Is it true that this provision could make the Department of Justice the personal counsel for the president, the vice president, or for federal officials in state criminal or civil cases? Is there a danger there?
There is certainly a danger because there typically the norm is that there's a separation there.
Does that terrify you to contemplate that?
It certainly doesn't help me sleep at night.
Okay, all right, I'll take that as in the affirmative. I do think that it goes strongly against what Americans want, what Vermonters want. They want to make sure, without fear or favor, they want to make sure we're doing this in a way that is not corrupt.